I had always been a man of curiosity, an eternal student of nature's mysteries. But in the year of our Lord 1484, my mind was to be captured by something that would forever alter the course of history. It began on a quiet evening, the kind when Milan seemed to fall asleep beneath the weight of its own grandeur, and I found myself alone in my study. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and parchment, and as the night stretched long, I felt the pull of a new idea, one that had lingered at the edges of my thoughts for months. I had already wrestled with the heavens and the earth, but now, it was time to unlock the secrets of the winds themselves. My fascination with the stars and planets had led me to look at the skies differently. I had always observed the natural world, every leaf, every wave, every gust of wind, but in recent years I'd turned my eye upward, studying the cosmic dance of the stars, the planets, and the eternal movement of the heavens. These observations had given me a new understanding of mechanics, a sense that everything in this world, every motion, had its cause, but it was the wind, that invisible force, that held my attention most. The wind, a silent harbinger of power, had long been used by sailors and farmers to move ships and turn mills. But what if there was more to it? What if I could harness this elusive force for something greater? My thoughts wandered toward my studies in hydrodynamics, my experiments with watermills, and the various mechanisms I had designed to lift, rotate, and move. Could wind be used in a similar way? I leaned forward, tapping the quill to my lips, my mind racing with possibilities. A machine powered not by men or beasts, but by the very air around us. A mechanical wonder that could move not just boats or mills, but could carry weight, drive wheels, and even push objects across land. In the dim light of my candle-lit room, the design began to form in my mind. The idea was simple, perhaps too simple in its beauty. A wind-driven engine. It would work like a great mechanical bird, its wings powered by nothing more than the invisible breath of the world. Its motion would be fluid, its parts intricate yet efficient, its energy endless, as long as the wind could be captured. I turned my drawn desk, my hands trembling with excitement. In the stillness of my chamber, I began sketching. The gears, the cogs, the blades. A windmill, yes, but with an entirely new purpose. I imagined it attached to a mechanism that could power a cart, a self-moving vehicle, powered not by horses, but by the unseen force that swept across the countryside. Could this be the key to unlocking the future? The sound of my quill scratching across the page filled the room, and the hours slipped away unnoticed. As dawn broke over the Milanese hills, I had my first blueprint, a machine not unlike the windmill, but with an intricate system of gears, pulleys, and blades that could turn the power of the wind into mechanical motion. It was, for lack of a better word, a wind machine. But that was only the beginning. I knew that the wind could not just move things on land. My mind leapt to the skies. What if this machine could fly? What if it could do more than just move across the earth? Perhaps, with the right calculations, we could use it to power vehicles, create energy, and perhaps one day even travel the skies. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself more and more engrossed in the possibilities. But I knew that, as with all great inventions, the road ahead would not be simple. There would be skeptics, naysayers, and perhaps, even worse, those who would want to steal my ideas and claim them as their own. But I was ready. I had lived a life in which every moment had been spent battling against the odds. Now I would bring forth a new era. I set my mind to work, preparing the drawings for what would be my greatest creation. But even as I prepared, a thought nagged at the back of my mind, a voice in the wind itself. This machine, this wind machine, would not just change the world, it would change everything. And so, with that thought, I began the next phase of my work. I would have to test the wind's strength, measure its power, and harness it with the precision that I had honed over the years. But I was not alone in this world of ambitious ideas. As the wind howled outside my window, I felt the presence of something much larger, something that would soon come to claim my attention. Little did I know that my invention would soon reach the ears of those in power, monarchs, scholars, and men whose ambition was as boundless as my own. And with their attention came not just recognition, but danger. The path ahead would not be one of simple invention. It would be a journey into the heart of power itself. But for now, in the quiet of my study, I had a new machine, one that could change the world. The wind machine had been born, and the winds were whispering of a future I had yet to imagine. It wasn't long before the winds that had once whispered ideas to me began to carry secrets of their own. My machine, the invention that had consumed my nights and fueled my days, was more than just a device for harnessing the power of nature. It was a revelation, a spark that could ignite not just the future of mechanical devices, but the course of history itself. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone powerful would take notice. I had not yet fully realized the consequences of such attention. I first felt the weight of these consequences when a letter arrived, sealed with the emblem of Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan. The letter was delivered under the cover of dusk, a time when one could be assured that no one would overhear secrets exchanged in shadowed corners. A servant from the Duke's court handed it to me without a word, his face hidden beneath the brim of his cap. I had long known that Ludovico, like many of the rulers in Italy, sought the counsel of those with knowledge of war, engineering, and science. He had turned to me in the past for matters of architecture and military strategy, but this was something different. I broke the seal and read the contents of the letter. It was simple, almost terse, yet laden with an unspoken weight. Master Leonardo, I have heard whispers of your work on a new mechanical device, one that moves by the power of the wind. Such an invention, if it could be perfected, may change the very balance of power in Europe. I request your presence in my court to discuss this matter further. Yours in service, Ludovico Sforza. My heart skipped a beat. A request for my presence at court could mean many things, none of which were trivial. Ludovico's court was a dangerous place, filled with intrigue and treachery. The city of Milan itself, though a hub of culture and learning, was constantly under siege, either from external enemies or from internal political power struggles. If my invention could be of use to Ludovico, it would place me directly in the path of those who would seek to control it, perhaps even at the cost of my life. But my mind was already racing. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. The wind machine, my creation, could be the very key to transforming warfare, transportation, and industry. If I could perfect it under the Duke's patronage, I would secure a place in history far beyond that of any artist. It was not just the future of Milan or Italy that was at stake. It was the future of Europe itself. I packed my things with haste, leaving behind my sketches and half-finished models, knowing that I must present my machine in its most refined form. The journey to Milan was long, but as I traveled, I reflected on what this invitation truly meant. The Duke's letter hinted at more than mere admiration. His request for secrecy spoke volumes about the power dynamics at play. If my invention could truly harness the wind's energy and move objects across land and water, it could be weaponized, used to gain control, to break sieges, to escape the reach of enemies. But it could also change everything. It could fuel cities, carry goods and people across vast distances, and revolutionize the way men lived. Upon my arrival in Milan, the city greeted me with the usual hum of activity. The streets were alive with merchants, soldiers, and craftsmen, each person wrapped in their own business, oblivious to the fact that an invention that could change the very fabric of their world was on the cusp of being revealed. The Duke's court was as I had expected, opulent, extravagant, and brimming with tension. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting Milan's past triumphs, and the air was thick with the scent of perfumes and the distant sound of instruments being tuned for a feast that would take place later that evening. But it wasn't the music or the food that concerned me. It was the eyes that followed me wherever I went. Eyes filled with ambition, greed, and in some cases, desperation. Ludovico himself greeted me with a firm handshake. His dark eyes, sharp as the edge of a blade, seemed to weigh every word I spoke. The Duke, though a man of considerable charm, was known for his cunning. He was a man who knew how to play the game of power, and I was about to become one of his many pieces on the board. "Leonardo," he said, his voice low and measured, "I have heard much about your work, and it has intrigued me greatly. But it is not just your artistic skills that I require, it is your mind. Tell me, how does this machine of yours work?" I had prepared my answer well, of course. I could not afford to reveal too much, but I knew I had to impress him with both my intellect and my discretion. "My machine," I began, "harnesses the power of the wind, a force we all know but rarely understand. It works through a system of blades and gears, which, when turned by the wind, can move objects across land and water. I have designed it to be efficient, self-sustaining, and scalable." Ludovico's eyes sparkled with interest, but he said nothing. Instead, he motioned for a servant to bring forth a small, half-assembled model of the machine. I had crafted this smaller version as a proof of concept, just enough to demonstrate its potential. The servant placed the model on a table, and I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze upon me as I began to demonstrate its operation. The gears turned, the blade spun, and for the briefest of moments, the wind seemed to whisper in response, as if approving of its release into the world. The Duke was silent for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he processed what he had seen. Then, with a slow smile, he spoke. "Impressive. But tell me, Leonardo, do you think this invention could serve a greater purpose, something beyond mere industry or art? Could it be used in matters of defense?" I paused, knowing that this was the moment that would shape my future. I had not expected the Duke to be so direct, but I was not surprised. Power, once given a taste, always sought more. "I believe," I said cautiously, that such a machine could be adapted to military uses, perhaps to move supplies swiftly or even to power siege engines. The possibilities are endless. The Duke leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And what if it could do more than that? What if it could be used to build weapons of unimaginable power? I knew then that I was at a crossroads. Ludovico had already seen the potential for using my invention in ways I had not considered. This was no longer just about art or science. It was about the future of warfare, the balance of power in Europe, and my place within that struggle. I had created something that could change the world. But the question now was, how would it be used? The following days in Ludovico's court were a whirlwind of meetings, schematics, and whispered conversations. The Duke's interest in my wind machine had quickly transformed into an obsession. The elegant halls of the Sforza Palace became my workshop, with servants constantly bringing fresh materials and scribes endlessly copying my designs. Each new iteration of my invention seemed to spark more questions than answers, and each time I looked into Ludovico's calculating eyes, I felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. What had begun as an exploration of the wind's natural power was now becoming a dangerous game of influence and control. Ludovico's desires were clear. As the Duke of Milan, he was not content with just his city's power. He craved more. He spoke often of unifying Italy, of creating a kingdom that would rival the great monarchies of Europe. And in his eyes, my wind machine was the key. The ability to move armies faster, to supply troops in the most remote corners of his territories, to outmaneuver his enemies. These were the ambitions that fueled his vision. The potential for such a machine to revolutionize war was undeniable, and the Duke saw it not as a tool for innovation, but as a weapon of domination. For the first time in my life, I questioned my own invention. The machine I had created, born from the purity of curiosity, now had the potential to bring destruction on a scale I had never imagined. My own fascination with the natural world had led me to this, an invention that could fuel not just industry and commerce, but the blood-soaked ambitions of rulers. I was not blind to the dangers of the path I was walking, and yet I could not turn away. Ludovico was persistent. Each evening after supper, he would summon me to his chambers, his voice low and persuasive. "Leonardo," he would say, his hand on my shoulder, "the future of Milan, of Italy, lies in your hands. You must not let your brilliance be wasted. You must help me create a new world." He spoke of kings and emperors, of grand battles and untold riches. His words were like a siren song, coaxing me into his world of politics and warfare. And while my mind was still captivated by the machine and the possibilities it presented, I knew that the true cost of my invention would be much higher than I had anticipated. But then it happened. One evening, as I worked late into the night on refining the machine's design, a shadow fell across my desk. I looked up to find a figure standing in the doorway, tall, cloaked in black, and his face obscured by a hood. He was a man who did not belong in the bright, gilded halls of the Duke's palace. His presence was a stark contrast to the opulence of the court. "I have a message for you, Master Leonardo," the figure said, his voice low and deliberate. "From those who do not want your invention to reach the world." I stood up, my heart racing. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He stepped forward, lifted the hood of his cloak to reveal a face I did not recognize, but one that carried a look of cold resolve. There are powerful men in this land who fear what your wind machine could mean, not just for Milan, but for all of Europe. There are those who would stop you before you can finish what you have started. I felt the chill of his words sink deep into my bones. I had known there would be opposition. No great invention in history had ever gone unchallenged. But to hear it from a messenger in the dead of night, from someone who moved in the shadows, was a sobering reminder of the risks I had taken. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice now steady, though my heart beat fast. "Do not finish the machine," the man said simply. "Do not let Ludovico use it. Leave Milan, leave the court, and this invention with it. The consequences of its creation are too great to be allowed." His warning hung in the air like a dark cloud. I wanted to dismiss him, to brush him off as another paranoid figure or an enemy of Ludovico. But the weight of his words, the coldness in his voice, suggested something deeper, something far more dangerous than I had imagined. The man took a step back toward the door, his eyes never leaving mine. "The choice is yours, Leonardo, but choose wisely. The wind that moves your machine also has the power to bring storms." With that he was gone, vanishing into the darkness of the palace halls, leaving me with nothing but his cryptic words and the deafening silence that followed. I stood there for a long while, my mind racing. The wind, yes, it had always been a force of nature, unseen, unstoppable. But now I wondered if the wind had become something more. Could my invention truly be the catalyst for a storm? Would I be responsible for unleashing something that could tear the fabric of Europe apart? The next morning I was summoned once again to Ludovico's court. He greeted me with his usual air of affability, but I could see the urgency in his eyes. "Leonardo," he said, clapping his hands together, "have you given more thought to the machine? We must move quickly if we are to seize the advantage. The future waits for no man." But as I stood there, looking into his eyes, I realized something that had been missing before. I was not just an artist anymore. I was standing at the crossroads of history, and the choices I made now would determine the course of the world. "Ludovico," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing in my heart. "There is more to this invention than you realize. It is not just a machine, it is a force. And once that force is unleashed, it cannot be contained." The Duke's expression faltered for a moment, a brief flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But then he smiled that sly, calculating smile of his, and I knew that he would stop at nothing to see his vision fulfilled. And so the winds of fate began to change. The storm had already started. The question now was whether I would be the one to control it, or whether it would control me. As I left the Duke's court that day, I felt the weight of the choice before me. I had created something powerful, perhaps too powerful. The wind machine had the potential to change everything, but at what cost? Would I be remembered as a visionary who altered the world, or as the man who opened the door to a darkness we could never close again? Only time would tell. The following weeks felt like a battle between my mind and my conscience. Every time I sat down to refine the design of the wind machine, I felt the heavy burden of what I was about to unleash. The possibility that it could forever alter the balance of power, not just in Milan, but across all of Europe, weighed on me. I had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this was no ordinary invention. It had the potential to ignite wars, to fuel empires, to create destruction on a scale that mankind had never seen. Ludovico, relentless in his pursuit of power, continued to press me. His courtiers, each one more eager than the last to see the machine completed, filled my days with endless discussions and tests. They were no longer just admirers of my artistry. They were men of strategy, military tacticians, engineers, all with their eyes on the future. I, too, had dreamed of changing the world with my ideas, but I had never imagined the cost would be so high. The Duke's words echoed in my mind, "The future waits for no man." But neither did the past. The ghosts of my own moral compass, the echoes of the man I once was, began to pull me back. The wind machine, I realized, was more than just a tool for war. It could be so much more. It could power the future of transportation. It could unlock the mysteries of energy. And yes, it could even change the way we thought about industry. But not if it was used for conquest and bloodshed. Not if I allowed Ludovico or any other monarch to use it as a weapon. I had to make a choice. The turning point came in a quiet moment, away from the court, in the stillness of my workshop. I stood before the large model of the wind machine, the metal gears and wooden blades reflecting the soft light of the early morning. The wind had begun to pick up outside, carrying with it a cool, restless energy. The world, it seemed, was shifting, and so was I. I reached for the model, my hand shaken, and in a single determined motion, I set it into motion. The blades turned, slowly at first, then with greater force. The gears whirred as the machine came to life, and for the first time I saw it not as a weapon, but as a promise of a better future, a future that could be shaped by the ingenuity of the human mind, not the cruelty of kings. And in that moment, I made my decision. I would leave Milan. The decision was not made lightly. I had spent years building my reputation, earning the respect of the Duke, and becoming entangled in the political web of power that surrounded the court. But I could not, in good conscience, allow my creation to be the spark for the fires of war. There were other ways, better ways, to use my knowledge, my talents, to change the world. And Milan, for all its promise, was not where I would make that change. I packed my belongings in the dead of night, taking only what I could carry, my notebooks, my drawings, and a small model of the wind machine, though I knew that leaving it behind would mean that I was relinquishing my claim to the future I had imagined. The Duke would not understand, but I no longer cared for the adulation of monarchs or the prestige of the court. I cared only for the future. The city of Milan disappeared behind me as I journeyed into the unknown. I knew not where my path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. My work, my vision, would not be defined by those who sought to control it. I would find others who shared my desire for progress, for enlightenment, for a future that embraced the better parts of humanity. Years later, as I look back on that fateful decision, I realize that it was the defining moment of my life. The wind machine did not fade into obscurity. It lived on, not as a weapon of war, but as a symbol of what mankind could achieve when we set aside our basest instincts and sought to build something greater. I never returned to Milan, but the whispers of my invention spread across Europe. It was not in the hands of kings or conquerors, but in the hands of inventors, engineers, and thinkers who saw its true potential. The machine became the foundation of an entirely new era, an era of energy, industry, and progress. And though I never saw it fully realized in my lifetime, I knew that my decision had been the right one. As for Ludovico, he eventually fell from power, his dreams of conquest left in ruins. Milan, too, would eventually be swept into the tides of history, but my invention would live on, far beyond the reach of any one ruler. The winds had carried it, as they had carried me, toward a future that no one could have predicted. I have often wondered, as I sit in the quiet of my study, whether history would have been different had I chosen to remain. Would the wind machine have become a tool of war, as Ludovico had dreamed, or would the world have embraced its true potential? But the past cannot be changed, and neither can the winds. They will always blow where they will, unstoppable and unpredictable. And as for me, I can only hope that the legacy I leave behind is one of progress, not destruction. For in the end, it is not the machines we create that define us. It is the choices we make, the ways we choose to use our gifts that will shape the future. And the future, as I have come to understand, is not something we control. It is something we are all carried toward by the winds of our own making.